Not many people sign up to be president. I can point out the people who have, but I assure you no one signs up to be president of a congregation during a pandemic. And on top of that, over the course of last year, before we got Hannah and before Veronica changed positions, we were really in flux in the office. Diane had to fill in and put on any number of hats. So not only is Diane an amazing person, an outstanding president, but she has given well beyond what is a reasonable expectation of a president, which already feels like an unreasonable ask of anyone. So I hope at some point today, before you leave, whether that's in 10 minutes or that's at the end of the shofar blast with Ne'ilah, you find the time to go up to Diane and say thank you and Yasher Koach. And if you don't get that opportunity, president@roadfade.org. I assure you that email could welcome some nice notes. And one other note before I begin, and Yasher Koach. That was really outstanding, beautiful, and courageous. And I'm talking about the singing. That was amazing. Now, I mean, there's obviously tons of jokes that I can make, especially about me singing, ha ha ha. But the earnestness that Diane brings to this position was seen right there. So thank you for joining in, and thank you, Diane. I say it every year, there is a strong minhag, a strong tradition, custom in our tradition that if your parents are still alive, that you leave during the Yizkor service. We are a superstitious tradition, and there's real power in that tradition, but it's only a custom. So if you feel that you would like to stay in, your parents are alive, but you would like to stay in for Yizkor, you are not running afoul of any real law, but custom is strong. We present ourselves differently based upon where we are. You tell a different version of your story on a first date than you do to your therapist. You tell a different story about yourself to the friend you haven't seen in a few months to the friend that you haven't seen in a few years. And each version of those stories change. They shift. One story has elements being left out while the other one sees new or different details being added in. Each story, they hint at the version of ourselves we wish was there. The best version that, for whatever reason, remains elusive. And yet, here we are. We're standing before God, being called to task not for one of those versions, but for the whole of them, for our fullness. Our tradition believes that only God can do the math. Only God can add up each version of ourselves. The high holidays arrive as the leaves begin to change, knowing that they will fall, as our days grow shorter and winter is looming. And we stand here right now as the gates of heaven are closing, and this brief service comes to service our past. We believe our tradition is telling us to sit with the pain and the joy of what we miss and what has been taken from us, while reminding us that that absence has something to teach us. But that's the easy part of Yizkor. Crying, remembering loved ones, the meaning they brought to our lives, the complications love brings to our life. All of that happens more than just here. Our task, the challenge of Yizkor, is turning it around and figuring out what more it has to teach us, what Yizkor on Yom Kippur has to offer us. But how do we get there? That's the question. The high holidays demand that we confront the person that we have been. Our tradition is steering us away from the mental gymnastics that we do throughout the year and to stare at the person we actually have been. And no one enjoys doing this. It's not fun. And yet it is a precious gift. It's the experience that forces upon us the blessing of making clear to us the version of ourselves that the world has seen in us, while helping us or giving us the tools to reach for a better version. When I look back, whether it's the past year or 10 years ago, I'm always embarrassed by my old self. I feel a real sense of shame when I look back upon the person that I used to be. It's humbling to see yourself, being forced to remember who you were, what you looked like, what you thought, what was important to you. But it's also a mitzvah. It's a deathbed realization, God willing, long before we are there. And when we do this, we are imitating what we call in the rabbi business, the intake. An intake is when you meet with a family to learn about a person so that you can give a eulogy about a person you may or may have never met. A rabbi is to sit there, ask probing questions, enable them a space to mourn, and hopefully yield an accurate portrayal of that person's life. An intake is a free-flowing, often nonlinear conversation animated by the perspectives of a spouse, siblings, children, and grandchildren, each who knew a different version of that person. The occasion allows a family to begin to grieve by sharing, having an intimate experience with each other that often reveals something new about their loved one. This activity is active and it is generative. And when we take on the humility of the high holidays, the humility of Yom Kippur, and embrace this day's wisdom, we are partaking and we get to lead our own intake. This personal intake is an active form of memory, but it's not calling on memory for its own sake, nor does it go only in one direction. The real challenge of Yizkor is compelling us towards doing this for ourselves, for each version of who we have been. And this is the bait and switch of Yizkor. We think it's about someone else, but it's really about us. Yizkor does not call upon us to think about only the good or only the painful, but to remember. And memory is a divine quality. And as we read through the liturgy and we think about our loved ones, we need to remember their shlema, the fullness of that person, the pieces that made them who they were, what makes them real, what makes their memory a blessing is what takes them from the outer depths of our being to being down here with us, making them real. And that is what we need to do for ourselves. Not to do surgery on our soul or our soul's memory. That thing you did, that thing you said, that time you dressed that way, that was you. You can't remove it. There's no scalpel or operating device for that person nor their actions. But just like when I sit with a family and provide them space to talk their memories out loud, the whole version of a person, the totality of a life lived emerges 90 minutes later. They and I get to see the messy, funny, kind, frustrating image of a life, of a real person. But where that intake is done through tears of what is gone, taken from us, this intake, what we will do in just a minute, is performed through what is within our grasp, what we can change. But you got to make that active, and then it will be generative. You must choose to enter into that process, the challenging and embarrassing procedure of recognizing our fullness. The service of Yizkor is not about memory, but using memory in the service of finding and being the best version of ourselves. We remember what made our loved ones who they were and what we loved about them, but also what frustrated us and hurt us. And how one day someone will be doing that remembering for us. The Yizkor service is asking us to have our head on a swivel, thinking back to being with them and shifting to how we can be better by using their memory to get us there. And that is what makes their memory a blessing. When we can do this, we will not only be better people, less embarrassed, less ashamed, cause less hurt next year, but then we will know that we will be remembered for our best version. That will be the version of ourselves that we lived, and then we'll be able to see the divine in each version of ourselves.